My wife is a school teacher. She has an education degree, and I often say to her, I wish I had actually studied education in college, because I travel all over the world, and the biggest story in the world, wherever you go, actually the most important and oft-discussed story in the world, in every country, is education. And you know what's really funny? Everywhere I go, they think they're behind. Everywhere you go, they think they're behind. You go to Singapore that's killing us on the math test, and they think their kids don't have the creative juice to invent a hula hoop. You go to America, Johnny and Susie can barely read, but Billy's got a ring in his nose, and he just invented a subset of Google. Okay. And so you have this incredible kind of tension in the world today of people trying to either focus on their fundamentals or on their creativity. Frankly, I'd rather have the fundamentals problem than the creativity problem, because the creativity problem is actually culture bound. Now, the thing you have to focus on, therefore, in my view, is not just more education, not just another hour of the school day. It's about the right education. And to me, the right education starts with a book that was written by my friend Dan Pink called A Whole New Mind. And Dan's book, very simply, basically argues you got your left brain, you got your right brain. Your left brain, very rigid, repetitive, not particularly imaginative. It's the side of your brain you used when you took your SAT exams in America. Your right brain, storytelling, synthesizing, dot connecting, innovative, and imaginative. At the most simple, we're moving into a right brain world. It's all about right brain, because everything on the left side of your brain can either be done by a computer faster or an Indian cheaper. Okay? Anything on the left side of your brain will be done by a computer faster or someone in India cheaper. It's a right brain world. And therefore, if you want to talk about not just more education, but the right education, you have to talk about nurturing right brain skills. How do we do that? Well, I think how you do that, actually, and this may sound counterintuitive to a lot of people, but it isn't, is you really have to nurture liberal arts. Math and science are hugely important. Engineering is hugely important. But where the real magic happens, is when you take two different specialties and you actually mash them together. It's in the mashups that all the real magic happens. And someone who taught me this is my friend Mark Tucker, who I interviewed for the later editions of The World is Flat. I just want to read you one paragraph from him because it's really central to my thinking. He said, one thing we know about creativity is that it typically occurs when people who have mastered two or more quite different fields use the framework in one to think afresh about the other. Intuitively, you know this to be true. Leonardo da Vinci was a great artist, scientist, and inventor, and each specialty nourished the other. He was a great lateral thinker. But if you spend your whole life in one silo, you will never have the mental agility to do the synthesis or connect the dots, which is usually where the great breakthroughs can be found. I don't know how many of you have ever looked on YouTube or read Steve Jobs' graduation speech at Stanford 3 years ago. But he really tells this wonderful story. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple. He went to a small liberal arts college in Portland, Oregon called Reed College. And he dropped out after one semester. He couldn't stand it. But he had nowhere to go, so he slept on the floor of a Hare Krishna temple. And he decided to take all the courses at Reed, or one of the courses he always wanted to take, but never thought he could fit in. He took a course in calligraphy. And he learned, as he tells the story, the beauty of typeface, serif and sans serif type. And 10 years later, he said, it all went into the first Mac keyboard. And the reason the Mac keyboard was so much more exciting than the Wintel keyboard, the first keyboard to really take typeface seriously, was because Steve Jobs dropped out of Reed College and took a course in calligraphy. You never know where the juice is going to come from. And that's why liberal arts, music, dance, literature, they are just as important as math and science. I'll give you one more example before I close, and it's my friend Wayne Clough, who was the president of Georgia Tech University. Georgia Tech is one of our technions, a very good engineering school in Atlanta. And Georgia Tech, 10 years ago, had a huge problem. They had a graduation rate of a little more than 60%. The university had a tradition, in fact. They'd line people up the first day. They would say, look left, look right. Only one of you will be here in 4 years. What a wonderful way to encourage kids to learn. So Wayne Clough took over Georgia Tech with the aim of improving graduation matriculation rates. And he spent a while trying to figure out what was wrong. And he was an engineer, thinking about the engineers he had worked with, who he thought were the most creative. And they weren't always, in fact, they were rarely the smartest. They weren't always the ones that had the right answer, but they were the ones who asked the most interesting questions and who were the most collaborative with their colleagues. And so on a complete flyer, actually it was an accident because the Atlanta Olympics had just happened, and he inherited all the instruments from the Olympic band. And on a whim, he basically, more than a whim, on an intuition, changed the admission requirements to Georgia Tech to say the following: we will give a very, very high preference for admission to Georgia Tech to anyone who plays a musical instrument, sings in a choir, is in a band, or plays on a sports team. Today, graduation rates at Georgia Tech are almost 80%, and the biggest problem Wayne Clough has is finding recital rooms for the multiple choirs, bands, and orchestras that now populate the campus of Georgia Tech. We're talking Georgia Tech, and they have like 4 chamber orchestras today. So yes, we want to get more rigorous and more math and more science, but the juice comes from the mashups. Let me end by telling you about my trip here to Israel. I had a very interesting day a couple days ago. I went up and visited Iskar in Tefen. I always wanted to meet Eitan Wertheimer, and I wanted to see with my own eyes the first company that Warren Buffett ever bought overseas. I went up there. It was amazing to see their campus. And Eitan was telling me the story. I said, Eitan, you closed the deal. In July 2006, Warren Buffett buys your company for $4 billion. And like a week later, Katyusha rockets are landing from Lebanon right over there. I said, what did Warren Buffett say? He said, Warren Buffett said, Eitan, I didn't buy you for a month. I bought you for 20 years. So I like that, such Warren Buffett-like thinking. We were driving out of the campus. I was listening to the Chadashot, and my Hebrew is good enough to understand that Ahmadinejad in Tehran had just issued another one of his Israel will disappear and be wiped off the map. I started thinking of a column. This is how columns come about. Popped into my head, what do Warren Buffett and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad have in common? Answer, they've both made a bet on Israel's future. And from everything I've seen here, and when I see conferences like this, I will tell you the bet I've made. I'm long Warren Buffett, and I'm short Ahmadinejad. Thank you very much.